Welcome to Theme 2 Rights and Responsibilities of the AQA GCSE Citizenship course. We're looking at how laws protect the citizen and deal with criminals, particularly how are employees represented. In the last video of this session, you looked at the terms to remember, what trade unions are, why they're important, and some examples. As well as that, you looked at why people join trade unions and what they do. In this video, you'll be looking at industrial action, what the procedures and rules are around taking industrial action, some examples of industrial action with case studies, the impacts of industrial action, and finally, the role of the Trade Union Congress. In order to take industrial action, there are steps that need to be taken. When there is a dispute between an employer and their employee, here are the steps that are taken to resolve it. Step 1. The dispute is taken to the Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service, also known as ACAS. They will work with both sides to negotiate an agreement. If a negotiation has been reached, then both parties will be happy. The problem exists if both parties could not agree through negotiation. This is when industrial action may be a possibility, but this needs to be made official. Ultimately, if a negotiation hasn't been reached, the next step is that employees must get the support of the trade union in order to make the industrial action official. Step 3 involves a secret postal ballot that takes place before, and the majority of the members must vote yes to the action. Step 4. The employer must be given details of the action before it actually takes place. So these are the steps that should be taken for industrial action to take place. Someone called a scrutineer will ensure that all the correct procedures are followed if the place of employment has more than 50 employees. We've just looked at the procedures and rules around taking industrial action. We are now going to move on to look at some types of industrial action with case studies. A planned strike is probably the most well-known type of industrial action. This is when employees refuse to go to work as normal. The rules for calling a strike must be followed. In most cases, it has been agreed that strikes may only last for 1 or 2 days. In some cases, there may be an indefinite strike, which doesn't specify dates for employees' return to work. Planned strikes must be made official and should follow the correct procedures. For example, members must vote for a strike in a secret ballot. Employees who go on strike are not paid on the days of the strike. In some cases, they may be paid very little. Employees will often stand at the entrance of their workplace, preventing others from going in. This is called a picket line. High numbers of members of the trade union will also attend organised rallies, marches and protests that may take place on the day or the days of the strike. Here's the case study of a planned strike. A planned 48-hour strike was planned in October 2014 by Rail, Maritime and Transport Union, RMT, due to staff cuts. TfL, Transport for London, said that it must make savings of £4.2 billion by 2020. In order to do this, it had closed down many ticket offices, which had resulted in people losing their jobs. A week before the strike, the RMT called off the strike as TfL promised to discuss the concerns with union representatives. The next example of a type of industrial action is a wildcat strike. This is when employees refuse to go to work as normal. This is unplanned, unexpected and unofficial. They therefore decide to stop working without following the procedures or even without an official ballot. The union has not yet even supported it in many cases. These types of strikes are very rare nowadays. A case study for this is the 2009 Lindsey Oil refinery strikes. These were a series of wildcat strikes that affected the energy industry in the UK in 2009. The action involved a few workers across various sites throughout the UK. They walked out in support of other British workers at Total Lindsey Oil Refinery, an energy and oil company. The construction workers went on strike because employment was not offered to them on a £2 million construction contract to build a hydrodesulfurization unit at the site. They felt that those jobs were going to non-British employees. The next example of a type of industrial action is overtime ban. This is when an employee refuses to go to work beyond the hours agreed in their contract of employment. This means they will not work any extra time under any circumstances. If unpaid overtime work is normal practice in the workplace, the organisation could lose money and production. The quality of work may not be as good, and this would therefore have an impact on the success of a company or organisation. An overtime ban can last for up to a month in one go. We're now going to look at the case study involving an overtime ban. The members of the trade union Public and Commercial Services work for the civil service. The civil service work for government departments and other public bodies. They can also provide advice and guidance to government ministers on a variety of issues affecting the public. From the 1st of December 2011 to the 31st, the PCS refused to work overtime. They did this as they believed they were working far too much overtime for the amount they were getting paid. They also had disputes about their pension scheme. The final example that we're going to look at is work to rule. This is when employees will only do the work that is specifically stated in their contract and no extra. They will not do any extra work under any circumstances. It's worth noting that overtime ban, which is an example we looked at on the previous slide, is a type of work to rule. This can have a negative impact on the quality of work produced by an organisation or company. It can also negatively impact on the amount of money made by the organisation or company and give it a bad reputation. The case study involves the Royal College of Nursing, which is a trade union for nurses. Nurses will regularly use the work to rule method due to disputes surrounding pay and conditions in the workplace. They refuse to work unpaid overtime and will insist on leaving the ward or clinic for breaks, something that they are usually unable to do as they are busy. They also refuse to carry out non-nursing duties such as cleaning, which is another role nurses are frequently asked to do when workplaces are short-staffed. They will even refuse to answer phone calls or emails or even organise patients' files. We've just explored some examples of industrial action with some case studies. We're now going to move on to look at the impact of industrial action. How much impact does industrial action actually have? As you can see, industrial action includes a range of actions. It's very powerful as it has an impact on, firstly, the employers, as they won't provide the services and goods they have promised. They could therefore lose money, their businesses could close down due to loss of profits, and it could lead to a bad reputation. Secondly, it impacts on the workers, as they do not get paid for industrial action. Even if they do, it is a very small amount. Thirdly, it impacts on families of the workers because they will have less income during the industrial strike. Also, it will have an impact on the people who use the services or goods, e.g. parents of students, people who need to get to work on public transport, etc. Finally, the local community's economy will be impacted as money is being lost by businesses on industrial action. It's important to note that industrial action also gains media attention and therefore puts pressure on decision makers to make a change. All of these factors will put pressure on employers to meet the needs of their workers, and therefore industrial action is very powerful and can have a very big impact. However, it does not mean that all industrial action is successful and reaches its desired aims. Here's an image involving a demonstration where many people got together, mainly those who work in schools and are teachers, to demand fair pay. When teachers go on strike, this has a big impact on students' learning, but also on parents who are required to stay at home and look after their children. This means that parents don't go into work, so it has a knock-on effect on the workplaces that parents might work in. And that in turn has an impact on the productivity of that workplace, the reputation of that workplace, and the money the workplace earns. This is an example of how an action can impact on others around you and therefore pressure employers or government into meeting the demands of certain groups of workers. We've now looked at the impacts of industrial action and we'll move on to look at what the Trade Union Congress is. The Trade Union Congress is also known as the TUC. It is a national body that represents most trade unions in the UK. The Royal College of Nursing and the British Medical Association are examples of two trade unions that are not members of the TUC. It brings trade unions together to draw up common policies and discuss and promote the rights of trade unions. It was set up in 1868 and helped lead to the legislation of TUs in 1871. Prior to 1871, trade unions were not legal and therefore wouldn't have been able to take industrial action. It wasn't until the Trade Union Act in 1871 was introduced that they were allowed to do such things and form as trade unions. It was the TUC that helped to campaign to ensure this piece of legislation was introduced. These are the main roles of the TUC. They lobby the government to implement policies that will benefit people at work. They campaign on economic and social issues. They represent working people on public bodies. They represent British workers in international bodies such as the EU and at the UN Employment Body. It carries out research on employment-related issues. They run an extensive training and education program for union reps. They help unions develop new services for their members. They help unions avoid clashes with each other. They build links with other trade union bodies worldwide. I suggest you draw a mind map with this information on the Trade Union Congress. You do not need to know everything word for word, but again, if you have a general understanding of the history of the TUC and its key responsibilities and what it does, that should be enough. We've come to the end of this video and we've just finished looking at the role of the Trade Union Congress. In the next video, you're going to be looking at two case studies, one involving equal pay for women and the other involving junior doctors.